Euan Ritchie is a professor of wildlife ecology at Deakin University. Professor Ritchie, Gouldian finches are on the Save Lee Point protest signs, but what will Darwin lose if land clearing at Lee Point continues?
Darwin will lose an amazingly special place that's really close to the city that people love, people in Darwin love, but also people from further afield, from across Australia, in fact, international visitors. We're extraordinarily fortunate to have things like Gouldian finches, black-footed tree rats, northern brush-tailed possums, and more than 200 species of birds, literally about 20 minutes from a major city. And to think that we would destroy that for housing development is absurd.
The project's been approved, the bulldozers are in, some of the old trees are already stacked up in a pile in the middle. Is it too late to change anyone's mind on this issue?
Look, a lot of damage has already been done and it's tragic. Some of those trees are centuries old and it takes a long time for their hollows that species need to live in, to raise their babies in, etc. They need those hollows and those trees are already gone and that's devastating. And of course, we should also mention importantly that the pain that this has caused First Nations peoples in the region as well, who have a cultural association with the site. It doesn't mean we should stop fighting. Every small area of habitat, whether it's in Darwin or other places around Australia, and particularly in our cities where there are lots of wildlife, we need to hold on to those. We've had huge rates of land clearing right across Australia, and we simply can't continue to destroy habitat if we have any hope of conserving our threatened species. The Australian government has a no new extinctions target, and if we keep destroying habitat, there's no way that they're going to meet that target.
What about wildlife spotters? They're in land clearing regulations. It looks like they didn't take part in the DHA land clearing. That's what the protesters have told us, at least. They saw no sign of them last week. What could wildlife spotters do if they were in place in a land clearing project like this?
Yeah, so wildlife spotters are normally employed to check the site prior to the destruction occurring, to relocate animals if they're in fear of those animals being hurt or killed. They can also, of course, be there as the action's occurring and capture animals and relocate them. I understand as well that there wasn't wildlife spotters on site, which again seems highly questionable given that many of those trees would have absolutely had animals living in them. So that's a question for the government about why that law wasn't adhered to. I understand, of course, protesters have been arrested. So clearly law was used there. So the question is why the law wasn't used when the wildlife spotters weren't used.
New housing has to go somewhere and the point's been made. On our text line on 0487 991 the people protesting are living in houses where land clearing occurred at some stage. But is there a way to build new housing that minimises the impact on the environment?
Look, absolutely. I mean, Darwin actually has a lot of land available for housing. I've visited Darwin many times and I've lived in Northern Australia for 15 years. So there's plenty of land available, including, of course, on defence land. So we don't need to destroy really precious places like Lee Point, of course, and more higher density urban living should also be encouraged. So we don't want to make the same mistakes we've made in other big cities where we keep sprawling out and destroying habitat. So yes, we've already cleared lots of habitat, but we don't need to continue to do that. We can look at much more sophisticated approaches to housing.
So what would you like to see in terms of strengthening of environmental laws?
Well, we'd like to see the environmental laws. So in 2022, the Albanese government promised stronger law reform and were highly critical of the previous government in neglecting nature for 10 years, and they promised to bring in new environmental legislation. At the moment, all we're going to get is an Environment Protection Agency, but we won't have national environmental standards and we won't have the laws that the EPA will need to actually function properly. So they haven't actually met that commitment. So until we have stronger environmental laws that protect the habitat of threatened species, which occur at Lee Point, and also recognise, of course, cultural values of sites, have a climate trigger as well. There's at the moment, no climate trigger in the new environment laws being proposed. So that disregards the impact of, you mentioned middle arm at the start, gas developments, coal developments, etc. The impact that would have on emissions, that is also not captured at the moment in environmental laws. So until we have stronger environmental laws, it's highly unlikely that we're likely to see threatened species and the condition of our ecosystems improve.
Euan Ritchie, you mentioned climate change triggers. The gas report from the federal government, from Madeleine King, the Resources Minister and Minister for Northern Australia, is due to be released today. It's talking about how the gas industry having a future well past 2050 and that talking about carbon capture and storage, which is an idea that's been promulgated heavily by the gas industry. Considering all that, do you hold out hope that there will be a climate trigger in any environmental laws that come before federal parliament?
Look, I don't hold out hope in the short term because the government hasn't shown any signs that they're actually eager to do that. And that's, again, devastating when we consider that the Great Barrier Reef and much of the coral reefs around the world are experiencing a severe bleaching event as we speak. We know that as emissions continue, the world will get hotter, and the hotter it gets, the more likely we are to see bleaching events and more severe bleaching events, the more likely we are to have extreme fires, and more frequent fires, etc. And that, of course, would be a concern to many people living in Northern Australia and across Australia in general. So we absolutely need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. The climate scientists have been saying this for many decades, and so we really need to see that action from government.
Euan Ritchie, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at Deakin University, thanks for joining us on ABC Radio Darwin.
Pleasure, thank you.